When Georgia Southern made the proposal to put the FABLAB down here, part of that was having to purchase this building, which the city had already purchased the building next door for $350 for argument's sake. It's a little bit different than that. This building came on the market in the crash of 2008, the latter part of 8 and 9. It was taken over in foreclosure by a local bank, and we went and purchased that out of foreclosure for about $450,000 and gave us quite a bit of space here, enough space for what Georgia Southern wanted to do. We were very, Alan Muldrew, who is our downtown Statesboro Downtown Development Authority director, he and I had conversations over the years about how important it was to try to get a presence for Georgia Southern downtown. If you were to drive through downtown Statesboro 10 years ago, as important as Georgia Southern is to our community, you wouldn't have known Georgia Southern was here. There was no reflection of the university in our downtown.
This was simply a matter of trying to get the university from our campus and having some level of economic impact in downtown. So we have about 20,000 students that come to Statesboro, and they get to spend 4 to 5 years within our community. But for many of them, they don't get to set foot in downtown location. So this was the Downtown Statesboro Development Authority initiative, where they approached the College of Business and said, is there an opportunity for us to change that? Is there an opportunity for us to develop programming and events that can bring some of these students to downtown to have some degree of economic impact? So really in about 2008, the city also had a stalled wireless grant in play that was trying to get a little bit of traction, and it wasn't taking hold. And the DSDA took a leadership position and convinced our university to have some degree of ownership in that process. So we partnered with the city, the city understood the dynamics and the importance of bringing the university downtown, and we started to develop a strategy to do that.
So at what point did EDA come in? Was that when you were thinking about funding, or earlier or later?
Yeah, well, the primary goal at the beginning was to really develop a program that works, and that has successful measures in place. And so when we developed the program, we understood we had a classroom, we had business research, we had a bookstore. There wasn't really a lot of synergy. So roughly after a few years of putting this process in place, we started to develop an understanding that it wasn't sustainable, and the university was starting to question the decision of incurring the additional expenses to being downtown. We can deliver many of the programs on our own, on our campus, and eliminate many of the expenses necessary. So we needed a dynamic, a new partner in play that allow us to reduce those expenses, allow us to develop programs and events that are catered towards successful outcomes. And so in about 2012, we approached EDA with the strategy that if we got the city to step in and acquire the property to keep the university downtown and eliminate that rental expense, would the EDA be willing to play partner and help us to renovate these two pieces of property in a way that would be functional and usable for our programs, and Incubator, Fabrication Lab being the two primary vehicles for that. And the EDA expressed a great deal of willingness and support in understanding that this concept could not just be successful, but transformative for Statesboro and for downtown specifically.
When we did apply together for the EDA grant and were awarded it, we had an old building, okay? We felt like we knew what it would cost to redo this building. But anybody that's been in construction knows that a surprise in an old building is not a surprise. So we did meet some challenges in renovating this building. The bottom line, the money ran out. We only had X amount of money to do it, and when we met some of these challenges, it cost more than we thought it was going to cost, so we had to start getting really creative. And the only way that we were going to get really creative where everybody could get through this process and get to an end product that we were all very proud of was to work together.
Since working with the federal agency can be perceived as somewhat daunting, can you talk a little bit about the application process? For instance, what was the timeline? How did documentation work? Things like that.
Yeah, I could show you the document that was needed for submission, and it was a little daunting because there was a lot of information that was required, from environmental reports to feasibility studies. But the truth of the matter was that it was very beneficial for us to go through that process to ensure that we had our ducks in a row, that we had processes and thought through all the different dynamics. You don't want issues to arise that you didn't anticipate. And there were some of those, but I felt as though having to go through that process, having to collect that information ahead of time, really put us on a strategic fast forward so that we were able to move quicker in that development, in that creation of the incubator and creation of the fabrication lab. So the application itself is quite literally a 6-inch binder, so it's pretty sizable. But when you pick it apart and you start to look at all the different elements, there's not anything in there that should be issuing red flag, impossible for people to deliver.
You have to be a little bit more cognizant of what you're doing on a day-to-day basis with the facility, or with, I guess, better said, with the buildings themselves, because those buildings are encumbered for the next 20 years. And so we have to use them like we said we'd use them. And when we sublease some space, not all of the space that we own is subleased by Georgia Southern University, we have to get their permission to do that. Is it a big deal? No. Does it take a little bit more time than if we were just simply a landlord and we were asking for a lease? Yeah, it does. We have to give ourselves 30 to 60 days out to do anything that requires their permission.
Once EDA started working with you, how did you find this process to work out? Was there technical assistance from EDA? Was there help available, a contact that you could call up or email and got responses from?
Yeah, the state director, so Jonathan Corso for the state of Georgia, which is fantastic. So very early on in that process, when we started to explore EDA as a viable funding stream, reached out to Jonathan, and he provided a great springboard for us to be able to get a sense of, is this approach that we're looking at, would it fall on a favorable ear at EDA? Does this fit within their funding priorities? Is this something that they'd be willing to make an investment? And would they even have the possibility to make those investments? Do they have the resources and the revenue at the time that we'd be submitting? So I would recommend for anybody that as soon as you started thinking about engaging EDA for whatever project you're looking at, to make that phone call, make that introduction, speak to Jonathan or the appropriate representative, and get a sense of, is this a favorable approach? Because there's some things that we would have liked, quite honestly, and he was very good about telling us up front that's not going to fly. That's though it's allowable within the federal expenses criteria, that's not something that they like to make investments in. And he was honest with us about that. So it forced us to be able to think, okay, how else can we do that? So we were able to get the facility, it's matching dollars from the city. We were able to get the renovations from EDA, but what about the equipment? What about the furnishings? What about those materials? So he helped point us in the right direction, saying, well, those really aren't expenses that EDA wants to make, particularly equipment that can be easily moved. So what we strongly urge you to do, and work with, with One Georgia, reach out to these other entities and other programs and events, or you really have to figure out how you're going to do it internally to come up with different expenses. And so those were conversations that we needed to have before we really moved forward.
And did these conversations continue after you found out that you were awarded the grant?
Yeah, well, so by the time that we received notification that we were getting awarded the EDA grant, we had a lot of other steps pretty well put in place. So nothing came as a large surprise to say, you're getting the EDA grant, oh, now we've got to hurry up and figure out where we're going to get tables from. Yeah. So we had great response from our community partners and from, in this case, the universities saying, okay, if this gets awarded, we will go ahead and make these expenses and we'll be able to pick up these costs. So we tried to clarify as much of that as we could early on to make sure that the project was successful at completion. So nobody wants a real beautiful empty building. So there's a lot of things you have to think through within that process to ensure that it's going to be successful.
Okay. Looking back at this entire setup, how would you overall describe the process of working with EDA? And more specifically, do you have any advice for our other members or other cities that would perhaps like to try something similar?
Probably the big takeaway that I had in engaging with the EDA office, I think communication is key. So even before you receive notification of the award, from the time that you receive the award and throughout the entire process of construction, renovations, and even afterward, don't be afraid to pick up the phone and place the call. Let them know where you are in that process.
You're going to want to talk to other people that have done that. Don't invent the wheel yourself. I know that's a corny expression, but it's true. Find somebody that you trust or that has done this before to do that.
because there was moments there where it was a little unclear when you had different partners. We had the university as the grant recipient, the city was providing the matching funds, and the city is the one who actually owns the property. So the city was central throughout this whole process. But we also had the Downtown Development Authority, who provided the initial foundation to help make this happen. So we had a lot of different people with their hands in the pot. So it became very confusing at times as who would be communicating with whom. So engaging the EDA and maintaining that relationship, having a single point of contact to help smooth those processes through, I think was very, very important. And EDA was very appreciative of that process too.
So I would be mindful of who I'm partnering with, if indeed I'm going down that road. I would talk to people like Dominique Halaby here at Georgia Southern University, who spearheaded this effort for the university, just to make sure that you're doing everything that you need to do. And then I'd be patient, because it takes some patience for sure.
I'd also encourage other applicants or other cities that are out there looking for those funds. Don't be discouraged when things start to shift a little bit, even with the communications, because EDA has a lot of other projects. They have a lot of other things. So there's times where things got kind of slipped through the cracks on both ends, but everybody was quick and able to respond to that and make adjustments. So EDA would let us know, hey, I need this document, and then we would have to provide it. So sometimes we think we provided everything, and it turns out that we didn't, that maybe we missed something. So we have to keep that communication channel open and be respectful of the entire process, and it kind of works out in the end.
In the end of the day, it is completely well worth it.